Shalom, shalom, giving honor and praise to the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. Brothers and sisters, this is a presentation being brought to you from the congregation Shema Yisrael, a Hebrew Israelite congregation based in Brooklyn, New York, giving due respect to the founder and elder of the camp, Nasi Zippor, Wagamet Bano, Nasi Natan El, Wagamet Saranu Saranatan El Mamate Lewi, Wagamet Ko Morai, Wagamet Ko Morotai, Wagamet Ko Zakwanai Waziknotai, Wagamet Ko Ha'amim Asher Azru Oti, Lihiyot More Bayisrael, Lemor El Yod He Wahe, Toda Elal, Loko Debarim Hatobim, Asher Hu Natan Li, La Asot, Etashi Urim Ha'ele. Brothers and sisters, giving honor and praise to the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. This particular teaching and presentation is being brought to you from the congregation Shema Yisrael. Now, I want to state offhand that not everyone may agree with the findings in this particular presentation, but I want it to be noted for edification purposes that for those who may disagree and have constructive criticism, please be mannerable in presenting the case as much as we are mannerable in presenting our argument. When we say argument, we're speaking in regards to our case, not necessarily a shouting match. All right? This is called portion bo, which in Hebrew means go. Of course, those familiar with Hebrew, we already know that bo comes from the root word ba, which is a lamed aleph verb, also meaning to come. All right? So this is something we want to be noted for edification purposes. All right? Giving glory and praise to the Most High, Yah. Hallelujah. This is a presentation brought to you from Shema Yisrael, a Hebrew Israelite congregation based in New York. As stated, everybody may not agree with the findings, the conclusions of this presentation as we go over from Exodus chapter 10 to Exodus chapter 13 regarding the Exodus, the manner of the children of Israel, among others, being enslaved in the land of Egypt and Northeast Africa in the northeastern part of that particular society during the Middle Kingdom. Most scholars date the Israelites being in Egypt in the Middle Kingdom. They do that due to the aspect of Raamses being mentioned in the book of Exodus, chapter 1. But as we stated 2 weeks ago, in a portion called Shemot, the book of Exodus, on this same particular channel, the Raamses that you see in the book of Exodus, chapter 1, is called an anachronism. That video will be in the description of this presentation. All right? Another thing that we want to sit there and have it to be known for edification purposes is the teaching that stated that the Exodus was a myth. There's some who state that, even though the people who state it, not to sound dogmatic, are the descendants of our former oppressors. So should we take the record left solely by the slave master, by the oppressor, or do we take, for instance, the sayings and statements of Nat Turner in modern times, or more modern than the Exodus in the scriptures? Do we take the record left from Sojourner Truth, and prior to that, the record left from Harriet Tubman, prior to that, to the situation that happened with Oluda Equiano, the situation that happened with Robert Smalls, the situation that happened with Nat Turner? Do we take those people's situations and what they were talking about in regards to their enslavement? Or do we take the modern thing like the Tennessee Project, trying to sit there and teach little black boys and girls that quote unquote Africans were brought to America to help them build? Brothers and sisters, that's not what happened. So we want that to be noted for edification purposes. The people who deny the Exodus have no kind of foundation, either from Egyptian or Hebrew sources, to state that the Exodus did not exist. The Egyptians, the people who refer to their land as Sema-Tawi, meaning the unity of the two lands. Ta meaning land, Sema meaning unity, inside of ancient Egyptian tongue, represented by the Upper and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt being Southern Egypt and Lower Egypt being Northern Egypt. In their records, they did not state, brothers and sisters, that they never had slaves. Some of the scholars debate whether or not you can translate or gain a meaning as Kemnu or Kemenu inside of ancient Egyptian to mean servant or slave. So if that be the case, and if they weren't slaves but were just simply servants, you have to sit back and then look at the record left of any servant to see how he or she was treated. Or do we take the modern aspect, brothers and sisters, and look at what they call indentured servants in what we call today the United States? Because indentured servants were lynched in colonial America. Indentured servants were shipped during the era of colonial America. So we have to begin to see, was there a big difference in the treatment between the slave and the indentured servant? The only distinction in colonial and then later on the country or the United States of America at that time was the length of time in which somebody did the service. Jacob, for all intents and purposes, you may say was an indentured servant to his uncle Laban, but Jacob was not treated right by his uncle Laban. So the point I'm presenting, brothers and sisters, is this. The argument given, oh, those are just indentured servants, that argument must cease. That argument is folly, because we have to look at the person who is the said oppressed, the one that is the recipient of the oppression. And in many cases, such is not presented. For instance, in scholarship, if you will, concerning ancient Egypt, to date, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know I have never seen any record from the Hyksos stating about their aspect of what happened. We read about the Ammu stele of 18th dynasty. We read about the situation with Manetho later on in the era with the Ptolemies and what he stated concerning the people called the Hyksos. But did the Hyksos leave any record themselves? That's a question we have to ask. See, the reason why we Israelites are kind of confident in what we're stating is because the record of the Israelites speak about the Israelites being good and bad. So not to be disrespectful, we didn't need another group like Ishmael or the Arabs in the Quran, which is their record, to say that Israel was wrong, because the prophet Jeremiah, long before Muhammad, said that Israel, in layman terms, you're off the hook, you're crazy. It's a grievous thing that you turned against Yah Elohim, Yah Elohim, the Lord their God, the Lord your God. You understand? So that's just something to point out in that particular regard. Brothers and sisters, as stated, not to be redundant, this is a presentation being brought to you from the congregation Shema Yisrael, headed on a human level by Nasi Zippor ben Zebulun, and as well as his son, Nasi Nathanael, a beautiful brother and a friend of mine, and as well as an elder to me. We're speaking of Chief Nathanael of the tribe of Levi. So we're going to go on, brothers and sisters, in this particular situation and teaching. Next slide. Thank you, my brother. The matter of Hebrew-Eebree-One, one who passed over. Now, in Hebrew, this comes from the root word abar. Some pronounce it as ibar. All right. There were Israelites in history in the land of Spain. And so they refer to that at one particular time called the Iberian Peninsula. Iberian Peninsula. You can look that up in your own time. Getting back to the subject matter of this particular slide, it says the matter of Hebrew-Eebree-One, one who passed over. According to Chauville, and he wrote a book entitled Biblical Archaeology and Focus, we see this. The name Habiru varies in the form from Sagaz in Sumerian. Now, Sumerian language is written, it's called cuneiform of today. All right. From Sagaz in Sumerian to Habiru, Habiru, Hapiru, Apiru, Abiru in Akkadian. Now, Akkadian becomes important, brothers and sisters, because when you're dealing with the aspect of the Akkadian people, all right, you're dealing, brothers and sisters, with people who, believe it or not, biblically were Hamites. Akkad was a kingdom that was started by Nimrod of Cush. The Cushites extended their kingdom as far as going to India. So you had Kush in continental Africa and the Indus Kush in what you call continental Asia and modern day India. So this is the expanse of what we was talking about in regards, brothers and sisters, to the ancient Kushite kingdom. The book of Josephus speaks about that as well. All right. Okay, so to Habiru, Habiru, Hapiru, Apiru, Abiru in Akkadian. There can be little doubt that the name Hebrew derives from the term. The word denoted a social class rather than an ethnic group. So what's being stated? A social class of people, meaning that it was a generic term. It was not a national term. Joseph called himself a Hebrew to strangers. Jonah in the Bible called himself a Hebrew to strangers. All right. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. One of the things, not to be haughty, you will find out when you listen to teachings, for instance, coming out of this congregation, Shema Yisrael, many people have commented and stated, oh, there's a lot of history involved. There's a lot of things being pointed out that some people may have not known. And then there's things being pointed out that some people who are biased care to not know. Why? Because they say, drop the Bible. It's not history. It's not real. It's not this. It's not that. But the archaeologists always use the scriptures to sit there and find out things. Ask any archaeologist. They go back to the scriptures. In regards to linguistics, as you see, the guy Chauville did in his book, Biblical Archaeology, which was written back in the 1970s or 80s. All right, Paul Johnson in his book, Civilization of Ancient Egypt, stated the following. A number of Egyptian documents refer to the Apiru, from the Akkadian tongue Hapiru or Habiru, hence Hebrew. To the Egyptians, this did not mean a special racial or ethnic group, but a social concept. Inferior people who are employed on forced labor. So what's going on, brothers and sisters, is this. So in the Bible, when the wife of Potiphar, all right, speaks to her husband saying, you brought this Hebrew into mock us, that term, Apiru, in the Egyptian is just letting it be known for edification purposes that, yeah, that was a denote term. Just like today, you got a class of people that they refer to, and I don't mean no disrespect intended, for instance, as Hispanic and Black. Those terminologies, for instance, are codes for other people who call themselves the majority while they call others the minority. So when we refer to ourselves by some saying Black, some people saying Hispanic, some people actually saying Black Hispanic. You understand what I'm saying? We are then given not so much power to the bywords, but more so to the aspect of we just want to be known to you by what you already call us. So when Joseph referred to himself as a Hebrew, that's what he was doing in that particular regard. So when we see in both sides of the slide, brothers and sisters, when it says, oh, okay, the word denoted a social class rather than an ethnic group on one side, then on the other side, it says inferior people who were employed on forced labor. Raamses II, as well as Thutmose III, spoke of the Hapiru. Now, as will be presented, Raamses II, as well as Thutmose III, was after the era of the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. But I just want to be pointed out for evidence purposes that this is talking about a particular set of people inside of Egypt as a generic term. Next slide. Thank you. Terms used regarding the Asiatics. The people called the Ammu, Sityu, Retenu, called the Jahi. All right. There's a book called Egypt of the Pharaohs by Sir Alan Gardiner. And his book is what I'm about to read from right here. It says, like the figures quoted for the Sosu or Bedouins and for the Koreans, who may derive their name, later extended to all Palestinians and Syrians. All right, so what you're looking at, it says the Shosu said also as the Shasu and the Bedouins. All right, and for the Koreans, who may derive their name, all right, later extended to all Palestinians and Syrians. So the people called Palestinians, we already know, as stated yesterday in this camp, Shema Yisrael, you had it to where Hadrian of Rome called that particular land in the Levant in part Palestine in honor of the Philistines in order to disrespect the true house of Israel. All right. So the Syrians in the Bible were called the Aramean or the people of Aram. The book of Josephus states that the terminology we see as Syria is the Greek terminology for what the Bible refers to as Aram. Immediately preceding, there is a reference to the Apiru. A few years ago, it was confidently asserted that these people were identical with the Hebrews of the Old Testament, but this is now denied by all but a few scholars. It is, however, generally accepted that they are to be equated with the Habiru, later Hapiru, of the Amarna tablets, apparently a generic term for outcasts or bandits belonging to no fixed ethnic groups. In Egyptian texts, they appear as Asiatic prisoners employed in stone quarries. So this is something we want to just show for edification purposes. Now, if you remember, brothers and sisters, the stone aspect was used in more so the New Kingdom and not so much the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. So this just goes to show that the terminologies such as the Habiru and Hapiru from the Egyptian Apiru, brothers and sisters, or denote a certain class of people, just like saying the slaves or the minorities or so forth and so on. So we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. The next thing, brothers and sisters, to point out, it says belonging to no fixed ethnic groups. So here's my question as stated earlier. Do we look, brothers and sisters, to solely the record of the said oppressor, or do we search to see if we can find any record of the said oppressed? Because if we're reading right here, even from Sir Alan Gardiner in his book, that the terminology Apiru belonged to no fixed ethnic group, how then can one say that the Israelites could have never been part of those people called the Apiru? Because see, the Egyptians did not sit there and distinguish which national name did the Apiru, as they were called, had for themselves. Let me break it down in a certain way. The people called niggers are not, brothers and sisters, given the respect to what name they call themselves. So we can gain, and sorry for going there with the terminology for the elders and the youth, but I just wanted to drive that point home so that way it could be noted for edification purposes. All right, let's go on to the next slide. The area we are speaking of. Now, the first part we see right there in the top left part comes from the book of Numbers. The bottom comes from the book, as you see, Daniel. It says what? And for the western border, you shall have the great sea for a border. This shall be your west border. Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven broke forth upon the great sea. All right, so what you're looking at is called, in certain archaeology terminologies, the Levant. And in this particular area is where a lot of archaeology was done, and a lot of archaeology was found, and a lot of archaeology it continues to go on. Now, one of the things we want to point out is when you quote in no disrespect intended, scholars dated from the 1970s, scholars dated from the era of the 1960s, scholars dated from the era of the 1950s and the 1940s. We must remember when they had the 6-year war or the 6-day war, sorry, it slipped my mind, but when they had what is also in part called the Yom Kippur Wars between the people in the land of Egypt and all this stuff going on in the 1960s, archaeologists were not allowed to dig into Egypt for a good amount of 6 to 10 years. So a lot of the information that we're going to present, brothers and sisters, comes from the time after archaeologists were allowed to dig in certain areas. All right. What we also want to touch on, as done last Sunday night, all right, in a portion called Wa Era, means and I appeared, which is also on this channel, Exodus chapter 6 to chapter 9, we went over a particular aspect that there are certain elites, certain officials who basically attempt to deny and hide information. We're going to explain that a little bit further too. All right, let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. The Ammu / Asiatics in Egypt. All right, now, just like the Hebrew classes, there's nothing that's being stated here that is just stated just for it to be stated, be it written or stated or verbally. All right, what you're looking at on the left-hand side, we want to pay close attention and deal with the so-called conscious community, because see, the way they view it in attacking the Israelite claims, brothers and sisters, is that Egypt, or Kemet, as they called it, because Egypt itself was bigger than Kemet, but we'll get into that later on. All right, you have it to where the whole thing, brothers and sisters, is Egypt and Northeast Africa, which is one part of the African continent, is supposed to represent all black people all over the earth. It represents blackness. And anything that is not Egypt, in their terminology, not of black people, must be Greece. So the people of Nok, as you go west of Egypt, that doesn't count. The Peleset, that's north of Egypt, going northeast, that is. Guess that doesn't count. The people, the black people that lived in Yemen and Oman, guess that didn't count. Because when you look at the history of the Jukun people in Western Africa, their records state that they came from Yemen and crossed over the Red Sea area and then continued going west. The people of the Yoruba, they state that they come from Northern Africa. The people and part of the Igbo and the people of the Ga, they state they come from the land of Israel. This is not being made up. GA, it's a tribe in Togo, West Africa. You can look it up. The Israelite origins of the Ga people that live in Togo, West Africa, and they will tell you they come from the land of Israel and migration. So I guess those people who are same complexion as myself, that doesn't count, because everything according to the conscious community will sit there and say Egypt is black, anything not that is Greek, which means white. So in their mind, they apparently have a concept, ideology, philosophy, and thought that Rome, which was white, doesn't matter, even though the Greeks spoke about the Romans. Sweden, which is white, guess that doesn't matter. Then you got the Far East, which the Bible calls the land of Sinim, which we call China. They're neither quote-unquote black nor white. I guess they certainly don't count. So you can't, I'm stating, brothers and sisters, use solely as color as a way of determining things. The whole concept, and it's not to sound like a racist, nor to sound like a coon. The whole concept of Negroid, Mongoloid, and Caucasoid comes from a guy named Blumenbach that is even mentioned in Rudolf Windsor's book, Babylon and Timbuktu, as stated. This is how we're coming scholastically. This is a presentation being brought to you from Shema Yisrael. All right, so that way we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. There were black people that were in Germany that were ruling. There were black people in England that were ruling. And sorry, no disrespect intended, there were white people in Egypt that were ruling. See, Mussolini tried to go to Ethiopia, but that ain't work. Candace of ancient Ethiopia, called Sheba by some people, beat up the army of Alexander. The Greeks couldn't really get past Elephantine Island. That's why many archaeologists and scholars and historians state to a great extent, besides the name Ethiopia, the particular land in Eastern Africa there was never colonized or conquered, even though they were given, yes, a European name. But there was never a sole ruler of another people ruling over them, like the house of Yisrael had European rulers having Israelites set up as puppets. Give you a case in example. Herod was an Edomite that was ruling in the land of Israel, and he was set up by the Romans. Case in point. So this is just something to be pointed out for edification purposes. Then you have on the right-hand side the Egyptian aspect of what they call the Ammu, or the Syrian in the front, and the Nubian, aka today's version of Ethiopia, behind that. So all these people, in layman terms of today, is what you call brown skin, dark skin, and light skin. So we have to remember, many people, as many of our light-skinned brothers and sisters have pointed out, that the Willie Lynch has worked in reverse and forward. In other words, You know, back in the day, in order to eat at a certain church, they used to say that you have to be lighter than a paper bag, brown paper bag. But what the conscious community has done is switched it. So many people might have seen my picture or seen me. I'm what you consider, some say brown skin or dark skin. But if you look at my brother Josiah, he's the same complexion as the woman whose stomach got cut open in March 5th, 1980, when my mother had a cesarean because I was too big to come out naturally. My mother was what you call a light-skinned woman. I'm darker than both of my parents, my mother and my father. I took after the complexion of my grandfather. So the point I'm getting to, when you get down, brothers and sisters, into it, is people have used the dark skin and light skin thing even in so-called consciousness. So when they look at the picture here on the left-hand side, even though they see a afro and a beard, they'll say, well, they're not the same color of the letters on top, so they might have been mixed. You got to be out your mind. Brothers and sisters, you got black males whose mama was white and they break pics because they got naps. We got to stop the color game as has been portrayed and projected. Remember, the Willie Lynch thing was have the dark-skinned slaves versus the light-skinned slaves, and then have the light-skinned slaves versus the dark-skinned slaves. Remember that? So our brothers and sisters who are light-skinned should not be hated upon by our people, and believe it or not, it is done. You understand? I've seen it even in my family. You understand? Immediate family and extended Israelite family. Sad to say. Now, when you're looking, brothers and sisters, at the picture on the right-hand side, you have it to where you see both people in what they call the tomb of Amenhotep III, paying homage to the Egyptian people. We're going to ask a question later, but remember that right here. Let's go on to the next slide. Ammu captives in Egypt. Now, this is, as stated before, from the Hecht Museum, Hecht, Hecht Museum in the land of Israel today. And as you can see, it is a person of color dated to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt as a captive. It's not too hard to figure out what it is in that particular regard. All right? So let's go on, brothers and sisters, to the next slide. Ammu captives in Egypt. Now, as stated before, what you're looking at on the left-hand side, brothers and sisters, is a person who has braids. All right? And the thing or the tan-looking thing on a person's head is a fillet, like a tie thing. And then you got the beard there. When you go into a book entitled Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in Ancient Times, page 29, the author, by the name of Donald Redford, he stated that is the typical picture of the average Asiatic in the Middle and Old Kingdom of Egypt. Brothers and sisters, the people of color. Then we have over here on the right-hand side, from what they call the Dura Europas. I know this picture was shown in the past in archaeology on this particular channel, but it is a ancient Israelite picture from the temple in Dura Europas in Syria, with them depicting the Exodus. Just like there was an Israelite elder in Bana Zakin, and he used to sit there and paint pictures of some of the chiefmen in Bana Zakin. You understand? So do Israelites in the 1970s did, so did Israelites in ancient times did. All right, but what we have to know and understand as far as imagery goes, we're not supposed to bow down to them. And what else can we not do? It says what? Bow down to them, nor what?
Nor serve them.
So this is something to be noted. So we don't want to get caught up in the imagery, brothers and sisters. We want to let it be known and understood. We are about serving the Most High, the Creator and Maker of heaven and earth. Next slide. Thank you. I'm going to ask the brother to read, please, in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 5, verse 16, so we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. We are in the book of Deuteronomy, brothers and sisters, chapter 5, verse 16. Thank you, Achi Josiah. And it says this.
Hallelujah. Honor thy father and thy mother, as Yah God have commanded thee, that thy days may be long, and that it may go well with thee upon the land which Yah thy God giveth thee.
Now, I meant him to read verse 14 and 15, but there's nothing wrong with reading about honoring parents. Go, my brother. I'm sorry, Aki. Then again, I'm not. Maybe it was meant for somebody to hear that they need to honor their parents because respect trumps knowledge. So all of the knowledge being dropped in the pictures and the artifacts and the etymology, that means nothing if you don't respect your parents. All right, so correct? So we're going to go on. I'm going to ask the brother to read Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 14. Thank you.
Hallelujah. But the seventh day is a Sabbath unto Yah your power, and that thou shalt not do any manner of work, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thine ox, nor thine ass, nor any of thy cattle that stranger that is within thy gates, that thy manservant, Sika, that may rest as well as you, as thou.
Continue. Thank you.
And thou shalt remember that thou was a servant in the land of Egypt, and Yah your power brought thee out of thence by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore Yah your power commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day.
Can you please read verse 15 again? It was done correctly, but I want to emphasize a point. Thank you.
King, and thou shalt remember that thou was a servant in the land of Egypt, and Yah your power brought thee out from thence by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm.
All right. So, in keeping of the Shabbat, as we read there, brothers and sisters, it says, you shall remember that you was a servant in the land of Egypt. Brothers and sisters, when we went over this before, there were certain people maybe in the comments saying that, well, that has nothing to do with the Shabbat. What he's teaching has nothing to do with the Shabbat. We just read right there in the book of Deuteronomy, it says concerning Shabbat that you shall remember that you was a servant in the land of Egypt. So how can teaching about the Exodus and evidence external to it on the Shabbat be against the Shabbat when the scriptures concerning the Shabbat says you're supposed to remember? What's one of the better ways to remember, brothers and sisters, than to rehash and to go over the subject matter? Now, if this, like I said, everything that's going to be presented may not be agreeable to everybody, so be it. Most High bless us all. You understand? One of the things, nonetheless, to point out is the teaching and the understanding and the concept and the ideology of saying, as some might have said or did say, that, well, going over all this stuff and it has nothing to do with the Shabbat. Maybe you didn't read in Deuteronomy chapter 5 what it says concerning the Sabbath, which in Hebrew is said as Shabbat, because it distinctly says in there concerning the observance of the Shabbat, you shall remember that you was a servant in the land of Egypt. So when we showing an aspect of the Ammu, which is part of the Asiatics who wound up going into Egypt in Dynasty 11, there's nothing wrong with studying about that on the Shabbat. There's nothing wrong on the Shabbat when you read in Exodus 1, and it says, in a new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. Joseph, what's wrong with reading about Joseph on the Shabbat? Everything ain't made for everybody. So we're going to go on to the next part. All right. You can't make everybody happy, such as life. When you're looking at the left-hand side right here, this is an image from ancient Egypt regarding captives. All right. And on the right-hand side, both these dated to the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, you have it to where people were being shown tied up and bound as servants inside the land of Egypt. So this is something we want to talk about and show for edification purposes. Next slide. Thank you. Exodus chapter 1, and the matter concerning Israel. Therefore, they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Raamses. And they made their lives bitter with hard service, and mortar, and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field, and all their service wherein they made them to serve with rigor. All right. Goshen, the land where the Israelites lived, was called Kes in Egyptian and Kesan in Greek. All right. So we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about in this particular regard. Let's remember something. Should have highlighted it. But it says, as we went over before, All right, in Exodus chapter 1, where it says in mortar and in brick. That becomes important as we already went over. Then it says they sit over them taskmasters. Today terminology, these taskmasters are called coons, as we went over, because they complained to the Pharaoh, said the fault is with your people, boss. So this is something just to go over for reason and purposes. Next slide, please. Matter of Pithom and Raamses. What is called Raamses is now called Fekus by a place called Quantir. All right? Quantir is also called Katana. Fekus was called Kesan by the Greeks. The same place was called Goshen by the Israelites. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, all right? Pithom is Pi-Atum, a place obviously where the Egyptians did worship their gods. One thing to note is that in Egyptian creation stories, Atum does self-sex. There are children and elders listening, so we will leave it at that, to make the world. There is in what they call the Egyptian creation story, utterance 527, when you can look that up in your own time. All right. Pyramid text utterance 527. You can read that nasty story of your own in which they said that Atum was by himself and did things with himself sexually to make the world. I'm not even going to go that deep because we're still inside of a camp and we saying thanks to the Most High. That's a nasty situation. Next slide. Thank you. Tel El Dab'a in archaeology. And what you're looking at, brothers and sisters, on the left-hand side is the modern picture of the land where they done archaeology from the 70s and 80s, and even a little before that, where they had to wind up digging up where the Israelites was at and doing service. All right. So this is something to be noted for edification purposes. You see it on both slides in that particular regard. Next slide. Thank you, my brother. The map so it can be seen. All right, the left-hand side, you see Avaris, Pithom, Goshen. This is the northeastern part of the land of Egypt by where they call the Nile Delta. Remember you read about the river in Exodus and then the river in Genesis previous to that? That river was important to the Egyptians, and we're going to discuss that as we go along because the river, the Nile River, flows from south to north. All right, and it's called, brothers and sisters, in Egyptian, Iteru, and called Yaor inside of the Hebrew. Okay, so we just want that to be noted. The Nile River starts from two different locations, one in current day Uganda and the other in current day Ethiopia, and they go north and they meet up. All right, what they call like Lake Victoria, Lake Tana, and so forth. Then they meet up, and then they have the different cataracts going all the way north, and then it dumps into the Mediterranean Sea. So this is something we just want to point out for edification purposes. So what you're looking at, brothers and sisters, on the right-hand side is Egypt, as you see there, right? The Sinai Peninsula, and north of that is the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea is the western sea to the Israelites, but the northern sea to the Egyptians. Next slide. Thank you. The location of Avaris, as discussed. What you're looking at highlighted there is the land of Avaris. All right. And that's where the Israelites was in part in doing the work in which they were doing inside of that particular land. So I want to go back, brothers and sisters, to the slide, right, that we looked at. Now, when you're looking at this particular part here in Egypt, on this slide here on the right-hand side, the Egyptians didn't really live too far into going toward Libya because the most of the Egyptian cities or nomes was all located up and down the Nile River Valley, as they refer to it as, all right, from south to north and from north to south, because the irrigation was there, so that's how they dealt with certain things. So this is just something we want to talk about for reason and purposes. The place where the Israelites was at, as seen here in Avaris on the map, brothers and sisters, is letting it be known for edification purposes, is where the Nile breaks off as it goes into the Mediterranean. All right, so we're going to go on to the next slide. Thank you. External sources of slaves in Egypt is as follows. In another case, a wife was left for Ammu, Asiatic slaves. So they passed down the people who were Asiatics as slaves from one person to the next. That comes from a book by Sir Alan Gardiner. All right. Not unto the Middle Kingdom is there evidence of Nubians and Asiatics as domestic slaves in Egypt. Now, the reason why I wanted to point that out, because it distinctly says there the Middle Kingdom. We're going to go and talk in depth, maybe even a little more than we did yesterday on Shabbat, about this particular Middle Kingdom, because the teaching that was done yesterday, giving honor and praise to the Most High on the Shabbat, was time constraint because the sun goes out earlier. But giving thanks to the Most High, giving thanks to the elders of the congregation that okay with me doing side teachings, if you want to call them that, this particular thing, we have a little bit more time to spare regarding doing a presentation. All right. So this is something to be noted for edification purposes. All right. The Middle Kingdom, remember what you're looking at there on the left-hand side where it says Middle Kingdom. Remember that, please. There is evidence from Tel El-Dab'a that a community of Asiatics existed in the 13th dynasty. The 13th dynasty is during the era of the Middle Kingdom. All right. Tel El-Dab'a is the modern terminology for Avaris. Avaris is the not so much modern terminology for what was called Rawati, Peru Nefer, and Raamses. Let that be noted. There is also reference to camps of Asiatic workmen, and this is written inside of a book, brothers and sisters, Oxford History of Ancient Egypt by Ian Shaw. So we're going to go on to the next slide. External sources of slaves in Egypt, part 2. The Asiatic inhabitants of the country at this period must have been more times more numerous than had been generally supposed. Whether or not this largely slave population could have played a part in hastening the impending Hyksos domination is difficult to say. Cambridge, Ancient History, Volume 2. Cambridge is a university, brothers and sisters. We're coming collegiate. We're not coming with my man down the block. No disrespect, I'm from the hood too, but we're not coming with my man down the block, made a video, and he's from Herkimer, he's from Saratoga, he's from Bergen. No. We're citing our sources. Collegiate level, not such and such TV where everybody is dropping an MF bomb and you gotta be like, oh my gosh, my daughter can't even listen to this. No, this is not how we coming out of Shema Yisrael. You understand? Asian slaves. Now, when we say Asian, we're talking about Western Asiatic, the Levant area, as shown earlier. We're not talking, brothers and sisters, about Cambodia or China or Japan or Vietnam or the Philippines. No offense to them, but I just want it to be noted for edification purposes. Whether merchandise or prisoners of war, merchandise, amazing, became plentiful in wealthy Egyptian households. So what kind of merchandise we talking about? Remember, Joseph was sold, he became merchandise, and his brother sold him for 20 pieces of silver. See, that's how you became merchandise. You were sold in one aspect, or taken as prisoners of war. Not to jump the gun. Remember, the Pharaoh went back after his former slaves to get them back. They would have been called prisoners of war. Many people try to say that the people taken in what's referred to as the Atlantic slave trade or the African slave trade were prisoners of war. But in many cases, concerning the Atlantic slave trade, according to Alexander Falconbridge in the 18th century, those people were kidnapped, like the people from the Arada and the Bambara people. Those weren't paid for by the African chiefs. They were just straight up kidnapped by certain Hamites and then sold to the Europeans, but that's a whole nother teaching. Okay, it should be noted, however, that on stele and in papyri, stele is the plural of a stela, and papyri is the plural, brothers and sisters, of papyrus. Asiatic slaves were increasingly often mentioned, though there's no means of telling whether they were prisoners of war or had infiltrated into Egypt of their own accord. Now, let's remember that last sentence because it says what? There's no way of telling, looking at it from the stela of Egypt or from the papyri, whether or not they were prisoners of war or they went to Egypt on their own. Let's remember that statement right now for a particular reason and go back to where we went to before. Right? Let's go back and scroll back up to here because it says concerning the Apiru, according to this scholar here, Sir Alan Gardiner, it says the people belonging to no fixed ethnic groups. In Egyptian texts, they appear as Asiatic prisoners employed in stone quarries. That's in the bold in the bottom of that particular slide. So when you look at that, brothers and sisters, it's saying that they belong to no fixed ethnic group who were called the Hapiru. So now remember, belonging to no fixed ethnic group in Egyptian records. Let's look back at this here, according to the same scholar, Sir Alan Gardiner, in his book, Egypt of the Pharaohs, page 133. It said, however, on stele and papyri, Asiatic slaves were increasingly often mentioned, though there is no means of telling whether they were prisoners of war or had infiltrated into Egypt of their own accord. Brothers and sisters, to the conscious community who say, oh, those Israelites this, they don't know what they're talking about. They're dealing with the Bible book. Brothers and sisters, you're going to have to answer to the scholars or their students, because some of them are dead already, about the things that they recorded. Because see, the argument will be, because I've been in all of the Facebook debate rooms, the Hebrew Israelite versus Kemet, the final trial. I've been through all of that stuff on Facebook and blocked it. And not to be haughty, for those who are already familiar, I wrote a book entitled Egypt Talk and Writing. And what I noticed in the debate aspect, when you present that you actually went in, did some work, some research, and present your information, it's like the conversation ends, even if they disagree with you. Because see, the work ends the debate. Just like I said about our beautiful brothers, Nasi Yashuvel and Rob Zuridan, this project they're doing in Georgia called Goshen, the debate stops when the work starts. Be it writing a book or putting some land together to side for our future. The people in those debate groups don't build nothing. Where are their books at? So these are things just to sit there and be noted for edification purposes. All right. So in this particular regard, it says this. We're going to go on to the next slide. Josephus, on a matter we are discussing, Antiquities of the Jews, Book 2, Chapter 9. They became very abusive to the Israelites and contrived many ways of afflicting them, for they enjoined them to cut a great number of channels for the river. Now, when they cut channels for the river, it's for more irrigation. Okay, the ancient Sumerians did the same thing. And to build walls for their cities and ramparts, that they might restrain the river and hinder its waters from stagnating upon its running over into its own banks. Because see, sometimes the Nile River overflows. So they had them building channels for irrigation, and at the same token, had them building things in case the Nile River overflow, it won't sit there and damage the stuff. All right? Or the stuff being the crops. They set them also to build pyramids, and by this wore them out and forced them to learn all sorts of arts and to accustom themselves to hard labor. Brothers and sisters, that's from the book of Josephus. The bottom part, brothers and sisters, it says this. Middle Kingdom. Egypt took place, they say circa or around the era, from 2000 to 1600 BCE. Now, I put in the part that says standard chronology, because we're going to talk about that chronology in this presentation. All right? During this time, the 11th, 12th, and 13th dynasty strived. Egypt emerged as an imperial power. Egypt also started gaining power of Nubia from its military force. Now, let's understand something, brothers and sisters, concerning this kind of matter. The dating we're going to explain is off with those BCE dates, but that's another subject. But the part I did want to sit there and get into is the fact that it speaks about the 11th, 12th, and 13th dynasty. That is the Middle Kingdom. So we want to emphasize on that. All right. So let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. The mud brick pyramid matter. Now, the book of Josephus also states, when you read in your own time, that the Israelites were made to build pyramids. So if you take what's written in the scriptures in the book of Exodus chapter 1, it says mortar and then brick. And here we see what? The mud brick pyramids that were being built by who? The house of Israel or the Israelites. So we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about in this particular regard. Let's go on to the next slide. pyramids of the MK of Egypt. MK stands for Middle Kingdom. Egypt has 138 pyramids, and 59 are from the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. The matter we are presenting is that the mud brick pyramid is built by the Asiatics, inclusive of the Israelites. This is explained in a lesson regarding Exodus 1 through 5 on this channel, and the YouTube address for that is right there, where you can look it up yourself or so forth, or just go to this channel and so forth. All right. Now, it says on the right-hand side, Middle Kingdom pyramids were smaller. Excuse me. Bless. Was smaller and less durable than those of the Old Kingdom. Senusret II built his pyramid at Elahum. It is built of mud bricks that fill the gaps between massive limestone walls that radiate from the center. After the end of the Old Kingdom pyramid building came to an end, it was revived in the 12th dynasty by Amenemhat I. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom never matched the size and quantity of the Old Kingdom pyramids. So what I wanted to show in that particular regard is how the mud brick pyramid looked from afar. All right, we see it right here, how it looks up close. We see here how it looks from afar. Next slide, thank you. The matter of the chronology. It says the dates of the majority of the pharaonic period, that is to say 3000 to 664 BCE, are based mainly on ancient king lists, dated inscriptions, and astronomical records. In the Old Kingdom, let's go in, O house of Israel. In the Old Kingdom, the margin for error is likely about 50 years. And in the first dynasty, you know, Namur and Djur and the rest of them. And in the first dynasty, it might be as high as 150 years. There were overlapping dates for reigns of kings due to co-regencies. Some rulers' names were poorly documented and are unknown or difficult to assess. Okay, so what do we get here? This is coming where we read in the matter of the chronology on the left-hand side from a book you can get online called Atlas of Ancient Egypt. We're not going with such and such channel on YouTube where everything is an MF bomb and so forth. We're not dealing with that, O house of Israel. You understand? We're not dealing with the debate circuit. We're not sitting up there entertaining. We're going to have a debate for 5 years, and then we're going to have a money situation, and I got to go back, and I'm going to fly around, and I'm going to sit there and make fake books. No, we don't make fake books in the house of Israel. I can honestly say before Yah, everybody who paid for my book directly from me has gotten it. Because Moreh Yeshaya, not to sound haughty, is not going to be exposed after reading and teaching Lo Tignob and then explaining that it's really with vowels. So you got the Kilik under the Tau and the Kolam under the Noon. No, all of that don't mean nothing if they can sit there and show, look, I sent my money to such and such brother and he ain't give me my book and he said he'll have it. See? And if the book comes late, I'll keep the person inbox or email over and over so they know I'm dealing upright. Because respect and righteousness trumps knowledge. None of this PowerPoint means anything if you can be exposed as a thief. See, when I used to hear thou shalt not steal as a child, I used to be like, oh, because I knew at 8 years old I was stealing. But when you're about to be most I blessed 38 this year, you shouldn't be out there getting caught with your hand in somebody else's substance. That's ridiculous. But they're scammers. But when they deny the Torah or they have a video shooting the Bible and then the people upset, man, I gave that dude my money. I never got my real estate. You know where I'm going. I never got my books. Those who know what I'm talking about know where I'm going. But you complimented and entertained a man who shot the book that says, do not defraud your neighbor. You entertained a man who shot up the book on a video that says, thou shalt not steal. So don't sit there and wonder, brothers and sisters, why those things happen. You thought it was funny when they said the Torah is garbage. You thought it was funny when they said we don't have to live by those commandments. So there you go. keep on economically fueling somebody for fake real estate and for fake sovereignty and so forth and so on, while you entertain them trying to insult the prophet Moshe. You get what you pay for. That was harsh. I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't have went that far. But anyway, we're going to want to emphasize on this point right here. It says the dates for the majority of the pharaonic period from the era of 3000 to 664 BCE are based mainly on ancient king lists. We're going to explain those lists in a second. Dated inscriptions, such as the scarabs, and astronomical records. That means that which they were able to sit there and gain from their own studies. In the Old Kingdom, the margin for error is likely about 50 years. And in the first dynasty, it might be as high as 150 years. Brothers and sisters, if the likelihood of error can be in the first dynasty 150 years, how in the world are you going to sit there and say you got the right chronology and the right timeline? How are you going to depend upon that timeline for, as some may say, for the world, brothers and sisters, when the Israelites always had in their record about them being enslaved in Egypt, but you're using a timeline that from 150 years could be stated to be unlikely of error. That is a century and a half. And then it says also, in the Old Kingdom, of 50 years difference. There were overlapping dates for reigns of kings. That means, as stated, due to co-regencies. A co-regency is when one king rules with another. In the scriptures, you see that with Uzziah and Jotham, kings of Judah, because Jotham took over the position of his father, Uzziah, after Uzziah got sick. All right. So they were both ruling. One was, I don't want to use the word puppet in regards to Jotham, king of Judah, but he was ruling in his father's face, but his father was behind him because his father couldn't stand in front of the people because his father was sick. So that has to be taken into aspect. Then it says some rulers' names are poorly documented. So how you going to sit there and state, brothers and sisters, that you got the whole thing and the whole timeline accurate when it says, brothers and sisters, that there's names that could have been erased? And we're going to go into that as this goes on in this particular teaching. Now, the book, as we stated, that I got the information from on the left-hand side, comes from a book called Atlas of Ancient Egypt by Malek. You can get that online. All right. The standard chronology of the 12th dynasty has been remodeled over the years in light of intensive studies and dated monumental records. Oxford History of Ancient Egypt, page 158 by Ian Shaw. So, if the 12th dynasty, as we already explained, is during the Middle Kingdom, if that timeline, as far as the kings and the years in which they ruled, it has been remodeled over the years in light of intensive studies and dated monumental records. So the record you see from Manetho or from Saqqara or from the record of Abydos, they're saying has to sit there and be reconstructed in order to fit it properly due to dated monumental records. Let's go on to the next slide. Essentially, in a nutshell, the timeline that's given of Egypt is off. All right. Under the kings of the 12th dynasty, it became the practice from the very beginning of the dynasty for the ruler to accept as co-regent for the last years of his reign his eldest son and intended successor. Introduction to Ancient Egypt, all right, by T. James is the author of that book, page 52. So we can gain an understanding of what we're talking about in this particular regard. Next slide, please. Remember, they had co-regencies because the son was also a co-regent in many times of the sitting king. All right. Chronology. The chronology of ancient Egypt is done an aspect of King's List. Remember, we went over that earlier in the other slide. Let's go on. Abydos list. Second intermediate period. Not all the kings, such as Akhenaten, Tut, Hatshepsut, are on that list. Saqqara list. found in 1860 and dated to the time of Raamses II. Hatshepsut, not mentioned. Amarna pharaohs, not mentioned. All right. Part of the Amarna pharaohs was Akhenaten. We want to explain why that name is brought up in that regard. Medunet Habu list goes from Amenhotep III to Horemhab. Thus skips Akhenaten and I. Mersil steel list. Akhenaten or Hatshepsut, nor I, nor Tut are mentioned on that list. Now, Tut is Tutankhamun, Amun, all right, of the 18th dynasty. Ramesseum king list, the same are not listed. This becomes important later in the matter of Akhenaten. Why does that become important in regards to the matter of Akhenaten? Is because you had people like Sigmund Freud who wrote a book called Moses and Monotheism, basically attempting to state that the theology and the teaching of Akhenaten is the same thing that is the teaching of the prophet Moses. So we're going to go, brothers and sisters, and look in the scriptures and the Mosaic laws and see what this is talking about. All right, because see, Akhenaten, what he was known for, when he changed his name to being like the radiant of the sun or the son of the sun or what have you, because Aten or Aten in Egyptian is the Sun. All right, so let's go, if we will, to Deuteronomy in the Mosaic laws. Deuteronomy, we're going to go to chapter 17, verse 2, as before. And it says this: if there be found in the midst of thee, within any of thy gates, which shall thy power giveth thee, man or woman, that doeth that which is evil in the sight of Yah, your power, and transgressing his covenant, and have gone and served other gods, and worshiped them, or the sun, or the moon, or any of the hosts of heaven, which I have not commanded, and it be told thee, and thou hear it, then thou shalt inquire diligently, and behold, if it be true, and the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought in Israel, then thou shalt bring forth that man or that woman who have done this evil thing unto thy gates, even that man or that woman, and thou shalt stone them with stones that they die. So the point, brothers and sisters, is sun worship, moon worship, or some may call it star gazing and worship, constellation worship, and so forth and so on. That's a death penalty. That's capital punishment according to the Mosaic laws. See, every culture has certain things that are capital punishment, and in the Israelite culture, given to us on a human level by the prophet Moses or Moshe, that's capital punishment to do sun worship. So Akhenaten pouring libations to the sun inside of pitchers, that's not Israelite culture. That's not what Moses came down off the mountain with. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Now, to show the chronology matter, the fact that they are missing names such as Akhenaten, I, Hatshepsut, Tut, and so forth. And in this particular one, you had to where Hatshepsut, who was a female that listed, some of those kings are not mentioned. Some of those queens are not mentioned. So if that being the case, you already got names missing. So you can look this up on your own time. That's why I put it bold type red. Abydos list, Sakara list, Medinet Habu list, Mersil Steel list, Ramesseum King list. So when you go back here and it says what? Are based on ancient king list. It said the chronology is based on ancient king lists. So when you go to these king lists and see that there's kings missing, you can't come up and then try to present that as a source of chronology. You got to sit back and get your homework done before you try to sit there and step up with that chronology king list that's missing names seem on purpose. Okay, so let's go on, brothers and sisters, into this one. Many state the records left from beneath though are not currently known. Thus, one may have to ask if the records mainly used as the Palermo inscription from the era of Dynasty 5, the Abydos, Saqqara, and Royal Turin Papyrus dating to the 19th and 20th dynasty are used and are all date prior to the time of Dynasty 20, inclusive of 20. How then can for the list of kings be after 20 dynasty be noted? Scarabs are used in the testimony of others. So essentially, brothers and sisters, when you're dealing after the era of what they call the New Kingdom and the later times and so forth and so on, they mainly getting that from a record that was left after Manetho's record. The point in all of this discussion about the chronology is just to go to show when they always ask Israelites, name the Pharaoh, name the Pharaoh, name the Pharaoh. I'm going to ask you, you name the Pharaoh according to the certain list. Because if the ancient Egyptians in their own records, as we went over, Abydos, Saqqara, Mesil, Steel, and so forth and so on, if they did not mention certain kings that ruled prior to the time of those steels, papyri, and stela, and what have you, were being made, then how you going to try to attack the Israelites for not wanting to record the name inside the Israelite record of the slave master while they're talking about their enslavement when your own heroes are not listed on your own list? It's not up to us to have to name the Pharaoh, even though we will show evidence on why we say what we say, because you got pharaohs missing in your own list. Get your list right before you try to come with this record and that record and then that record and then try to come against the house of Israel. Can't do that. Cannot do that, brothers and sisters. All right, and elders included. Scarabs are used in the testimony of others. That is to say, when Herodotus, for instance, went into Egypt in the 5th century BCE, the Egyptian priest spoke to him about certain things. Okay, testimony of others, such as the aspect of when the Egyptians spoke in regards to Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, and he had a king list and then put himself on there, which came to be known now as Dynasty 32. So these are things we want to be pointed out for evidence purposes. Next slide, please. Chronology, part 4. The so-called intermediate periods have proved to be particularly awkward phases, partly because there was often more than one ruler or dynasty reigning simultaneously in different parts of the country. So what are we saying and pointing out? The intermediate periods, for instance, Dynasty 14 and Dynasty 16 was ruling at different parts of Egypt at the same time. Remember, we discussed that Dynasty 11, 12, and 13 is the Middle Kingdom. Well, Dynasty 14 to Dynasty 17, brothers and sisters, is what is referred to as the second intermediate period. The second intermediate period, brothers and sisters, has it to where Dynasty 14 and 16 are ruling at the same time. So when they have a list of kings with one stacked up above the other, it pushes the timeline way back. Knowing that, and the fact they want to forget about anachronisms in the scriptures, in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, you have it, brothers and sisters, to where they're saying, well, we don't see no evidence of the Exodus. You know good and well, Eusebius of ancient times wrote down that there was more ruler than one at one time in Egypt. You know that already. You understand? So this is something to be noted for reference purposes. All right. So in regards, I think the question about lower or upper, when you look at the Dynasty 16 is in Lower Egypt and Dynasty 14 was in upper. Because Dynasty 16, I think I'm answering somebody's question. I'm hoping correctly. If they were asking which part was what, Dynasty 16 of ancient Egypt was in Lower Egypt, which is the north. And Dynasty 14, brothers and sisters, was in the southern part of Egypt called Upper Egypt. All right. So hopefully that answered the question if that was what was being asked by somebody in a live chat. Now, looking at this right here, it says what? Archaic period. We're looking at the thing on the right-hand side. Archaic period, which some refer to in part as the Scorpion dynasty. Then you have the Old Kingdom. Now, the dates we already went over is not always 100, but I just wanted to show what dynasties and what kingdoms it is fitted in. Okay, the Old Kingdom, then you had the first intermediate period. Then you had the Middle Kingdom. Then you had the second intermediate period. Then you had the New Kingdom. All right? So then with the New Kingdom, after that, you had the third intermediate period. Then you had the late period. The late period starting in Dynasty 26. Dynasty 26, then you get to Dynasty 27. Dynasty 27, as you see there, the Persians. That's when you get the era of the Passover papyrus. Remember that for this presentation. So that's something we just want to point out in that particular regard. All right. When you look at this right here, it's some of them ruling at the same time. Next slide. Timeline in ancient Egypt. All righty. Unification of Egypt under King Namur or Menes. Archaic period. All right. Old Kingdom. First intermediate period. Middle Kingdom. Second intermediate period. Now, let's look at what it says about the Middle Kingdom. City of Thebes achieves prominence. Thebes is in the southern part or upper Egypt, all right? Also, the priesthood of Ammu. Let's remember that as we go on in this particular PowerPoint. Second intermediate period, Hyksos rulers in the Delta who were the invaders. As we went over 2 weeks ago on this channel entitled The Shemot, the names, Exodus chapter 1, Exodus chapter 5, these particular Hyksos were the Amalekites that you see scripturally called the Amalek, or were these Hyksos were the Amalekites that Exodus 17 talks about. So this is something we want to get into for reference purposes. Let's go on into the next part. And no disrespect intended, when you look at this right here, when it says Ptolemaic period, brothers and sisters, one of the arguments presented against Israelites is, well, when you look at it, we had 32 dynasties. Now, as stated before, the more dynasties your society has, the worse your society looks. It looks like it's unstable. Just like the more jobs you have on a resume, it looks like you can't hold down the job or you quit easily. So having stated that before, brothers and sisters, one of the arguments given is because remember, in the conscious community, Egypt represents all black people all over the planet or all over Earth. I'm not getting into whether or not Earth is a planet. That's not what this teaching is about. But the point I'm getting to is Egypt is deemed by the conscious community to represent all black people on the dry land mass. Brothers and sisters, that's folly. Because then when you're trying to say we had 32 dynasties, as has been stated, you forgot the last dynasty with white people. Ptolemy, the first Soda, was not black. Okay, so this is something we just want to point out for reference purposes. Captivity memorialized. As stated before, this is coming, brothers and sisters, from the tomb of Mekhetre of ancient Egypt in Dynasty 13. All right, with the people shown being made to serve and all manner of service in the field. And on the other side, the aspect of the mariners in that particular regard. Now, many people may sit there and say, well, how can you sit there and state, oh, those people weren't just simple workers? Because we're going to read about the record that they left behind for themselves. If you remember the slide from the aspect of what was called the Heck Museum, that's the same way the people shown as a captive there in the Middle Kingdom of Egypt is dressed there. So we're going to go on in the next particular slide. Image from slavery from SE, which stands for Suzanne Everett in her book, a book you can get online, and SS stands for slave ship. So this is just something we want to point out for evidence purposes, with the people being led as captives and then the people being shipped off as captives. All right, we're going to go on to the next slide. Pharaohs of Dynasty 12 and 13. Now, what you're looking at on the left-hand side is Dynasty 12. As we already established, that's during the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. All right. The bold type ones, there is Amenemhat III and Amenemhat IV. What you're looking at on the right-hand side, bold type, is Sobek-hotep III and then Ferhotep I. Now, on Dynasty 13, that's not all the pharaohs that ruled. It's just a list of them, and I wanted to highlight on some of them for a particular reason. All right, so we're going to go on to the next slide, remembering the names that's highlighted. Amenemhat III and then Ferhotep I. Looking at it from the left-hand side, that's Amenemhat III. His pyramid is said by archaeologists in many cases to not be allowed to be dug into, or research has to be done regarding that particular aspect. Then you look at Neferhotep on the right side, and his tomb was never found. So we want to sit there and go into this particular aspect. Amenemhat IV, tomb not found, and the Ammu / the Asiatics. These Ammu were called core that you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen. The Arameans, aka Syrians, were the same family, brothers and sisters of Rachel, Joseph's mother. Jacob, Joseph's father, was a Chaldean. The Chaldeans were not Caucasoid, to put it in layman terms. So we can see how Joseph would have been looking. See? All right. So getting back into the particular aspect, on the left-hand side, Amenemhat IV, whose tomb was not found, and is said to have been a co-regent ruler in part with Amenemhat III. Amenemhat III and Amenemhat IV are not biologically related. Amenemhat III did not have a son to rule on the throne. And after the rule, brothers and sisters, of Amenemhat IV, which was in part co-regent with Amenemhat III, you see a woman named Sebek Nefru that was ruling in Dynasty 12, and then it came to an end. Not to be sexist, but the fact that you had a female ruler shows that there were no males over there to be ruled, and Dynasty 12 just came down like boom. All right. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. As pointed out before, many people believe and state with their reasoning, as will be presented in this particular case, Amenemhat IV was the name given to the Israelite leader that we know currently and scripturally as Moshe, or aka Moses. Many scholars state such. You can research this, such as Archaeology in Ancient Egypt by David Down, for instance, to get into that particular aspect. And Amenemhat IV was not Caucasian, but they still have to sit there and say that with reasoning, it serves that he was a younger version, not the older version that came back after fleeing to Midian of Moshe. So let's go on to the next slide, if we will. The Middle Kingdom matter and a map for edification, so we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. The Middle Kingdom, looking at the left-hand side, you got Sudan, you got Nubia, and over there is Egypt. Then to that, you got the Red Sea. Following the collapse of the Old Kingdom, historians can call the next period the Middle Kingdom. During this time, Egypt's trade and empire expanded. Of course, because you had servants. Of course, it expanded in trade. Just like during the era of the 1700s in America, when you had servants, slaves, trade expanded then as well, because they were taking a cotton that the people picked in the South and shipping it to as far as East India. All right, so Egypt conquered kingdoms in Nubia, gained control of gold mines. People from the Fertile Crescent began to move into Egypt's Delta region during the Middle Kingdom. People from the Fertile Crescent. So when you're looking at the map over here, the Fertile Crescent vicinity, they were moving into Egypt during the Middle Kingdom. See, so the Asiatics was already there. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right, we're going to go on to the next slide. Thank you. The Brooklyn Papyrus matter. We already went over this before, but just want to state this briefly. All right, and it says this: the Brooklyn Museum Papyrus 35.1446. The Asiatic woman Shifra, she is called Senep-Punutes, a weaver of linen. We already explained this 2 weeks ago online. The Asiatic woman Asher, she is called Meretnub, a weaver of linen. So you see Shifra and Asher. We already explained this in the past. So just want that to be noted. But this was delivered to Sobek-Hotep III from a woman in Upper Egypt or Southern Egypt, all right, by her name was Senep-Tisi. We're going to go on to the next slide. Senep-Tisi is the person that you're looking at on the left-hand side memorialized. And so Sobek-Hotep III is what you're looking at on the right-hand side. So this is during the era of Dynasty 13 of Egypt. So we're going to go on to the next slide. Exodus chapter 10, verse 1 through 5. And Yah said unto Moshe, go in unto Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his servants, that I might show these my signs among them, and that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son and thy son's son, what things have I wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that ye may know how that I am Yah. And Moshe and Aharon came in unto Pharaoh and said unto him, Ko Amar Yah Elohei HaEbrim, thus saith Yah, the God of the Hebrews, how long wilt thou refuse to humble thyself before me? Shalach Ami, Waya Abduni, let my people go that they may serve me. Else, if thou refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring the locusts into thy coast, and they shall cover the face of the earth, that one cannot be able to see the earth, and that they shall eat the residue of that which is escaped, which remaineth unto you from the hell, and shall eat every tree which groweth for you out of the field. Brothers and sisters, let's go on to the next slide. The matter of locusts and darkness. And Yah turned an exceeding strong west wind, which took up the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in the border of Egypt. Wayahafok Yodhewahe, Ruach Yam, Kazak Me'od, Wayisa et Ha'arbe, Wayit Kwa Ehu, Yamasuf, Lo Nish Arbe Echad, Bako Gibul Misrayim. Now, the reason why I wanted to make sure I read that in the Hebrew is because in the English there, it says, what? By a strong west wind. But we have to understand that all it says, brothers and sisters, is strong wind. It doesn't say in the Hebrew strong west wind. This is why I made sure I put the Hebrew in that particular part. All right. Then it says Kazak Me'od, very strong. Right. Then it says that it went up into the Yam Suf. The Yam Suf, they unfortunately translate as the Red Sea, which is really the Reed Sea, R-E-E-D. All right, R-E-E-D. All right, Reed Sea. So we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about for edification purposes. All right, R-E-E-D means the Reed Sea, the Sea of Reeds. All right, so let's go on. And Yah said unto Moshe, stretch out thine hand toward heaven, and that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. And Moshe stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They saw not one another, neither rose any from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. And Pharaoh called Moshe and said, go ye serve Yah. Only let your flocks and your herds be stayed. Let your little ones also go out with you. So he's a hypocrite, because part of the service of the Most High was that they were going to be doing sacrifices. So when you say go out even with your little ones, but let your flocks be stayed, so when this plague goes away, I can sit there and get you back because you're going to want your flocks back. See, that's called gain. You understand? So this is something to be noted for edification purposes. Next slide. Thank you. Exodus chapter 11, verse 1 through 7. The matter of the death of the firstborn. And Yah said unto Moshe, yet will I bring one plague more upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterward he will let you go hence. When he shall let you go, he shall thrust you out hence altogether. Altogether meaning everything. You, your children, your flocks, everything. It's not like, okay, only the men will go and they come back and the flocks will go. No. Speak now in the ears of the people, and let every man borrow of his neighbor, and every woman of her neighbor, jewels of silver and jewels of gold. And Moshe said, thus saith Yah, about midnight will I go into the midst of Mizraim, Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Mizraim, Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sitteth upon the throne, even unto the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and nor the firstborn of beasts. The Most High is not a turn the other cheek God. You dealt with my son wrong, I'm going to deal with your son like you dealt with my son. Yisrael, being the son of Yah. And there shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, even such as there was none like it, nor shall be like it any more. But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that ye may know how that Yah doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Yisrael. Shall a dog not wet his tongue? Because dogs would bill in part around the deceased. So this is something we want this to be noted for edification purposes. In this regard, it says that about midnight will I go into the midst of the land of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. See, when the Most High dealt with how to deal with enslavement, there was no treaty. You understand? There was no, you're going to go into Pharaoh, you're going to have this document, He's going to sign it off, and he'll give you sovereignty, and you won't have to pay taxes no more. And then you became your sovereignty, and everything will be cool. And he'll give you already a number called a social security number, which is used inside of banks and courts, and you can just use this, and now you can gain sovereignty and not have to pay taxes. Brothers and sisters, that's not how we're going to gain freedom. You understand? This is something to be noted for edification purposes. When freedom was gained, people died. Malcolm X spoke about that and what you call a ballad of the bullet. There was no negotiating your freedom. You don't sit there and talk, we shall overcome, please help me. No, death comes to those who enslave. This is something we're talking about from the Most High. You understand? So when we're dealing in this particular aspect and in this particular regard, this is the word of the Most High. It stated that he will slay the firstborn of Pharaoh. This is why one of the pharaohs we're going to talk about had to wind up having his brother be the successor and not his son. That's another subject we're going to get into as we go along in this presentation. Okay, so when you're looking at that particular regard, when you're looking at that particular aspect, brothers and sisters, there was no negotiating this matter for your freedom. You don't talk your way to freedom. You fight your way for freedom. But in this case, Yisrael didn't have to fight because the Holy One of Yisrael did the fighting against the gods of Egypt. You understand? So we're going to go on to the next slide. This is referred to, as discussed before, the Epura Papyrus. Now, this right here, in this particular regard, we'll go into this a little bit more in depth as we have done it, as opposed to the past. This is dated to the MK of Egypt. And we already stated MK stands for Middle Kingdom. And translated in the early 20th century by scholars who stated it is an Egyptian account of the plagues which the Torah speaks of. So let's go on to the next slide and see what we see right here. And it says this. In the early 19th century, a papyrus dating to the Middle Kingdom, remember we always talking about that Middle Kingdom, right, was discovered in Egypt. This papyrus was taken to the Leiden Museum in Holland and translated by A.H. Gardiner in 1909. That is to say, the early 20th century. The entire text appears in the book Admonitions of an Egyptian from the Hieratic Papyrus in Leiden, and describes major changes in Egypt: famine, drought, the slaves, flight from Egypt, and their assets, death all over the nation. The papyrus was written by an Egyptian called Ipura, and it appears from the contents that this individual personally witnessed the disasters that struck Egypt. This papyrus is most significant handwritten description of the catastrophes, the death of Egyptian society, and the destruction of Pharaoh. So this is something to be noted for edification purposes. Brothers and sisters, now, as stated, it is written inside of a papyrus. That is like the paper of their day and time. It wasn't etched in stone. We already explained when they talk about, oh, you got to not deal with the papyrus. You got to look at the stones and the writings on the stones. That's just like America saying, listen, in 2006, when they shot Sean Bell 50 times, don't look at the Daily News in New York. When they beat Rodney King in 1991, don't look at the LA Times in California. Look at Mount Rushmore. Look at the Washington Monument. This is something I want to sit there and emphasize for edification purposes. What they're saying to Israelites when we present this argument is, well, that's a papyrus, but what does it say then on the walls? Does it say the same thing? This is written in Hieratic. Hieratic is not the average Egyptian royalty writing. The average Egyptian royalty writing dealt with the aspect, brothers and sisters, of what you call the hieroglyphic aspect, or with the bird and the owl looking thing. The Hieratic writing was more of the common people of ancient Egypt writing. So I want to see what the layman got to say. I want to see what the so-called peasant has to say. I don't want to sit there and see what George Bush is going to say. I'm not going to sit there and want to see what Donald Trump, who sits there and says you'll date his daughter. I don't need to sit there and take only his side in the matter. You understand? This is something we want to point out because everybody, I'm a pharaoh and I'm Queen Hatshepsut and my name is Thutmose Amun Ra and all of that stuff like that where everybody's a leader. Nobody is the doorman. Nobody is the janitor. Nobody is the school teacher. Nobody is the babysitter. Nobody does the daycare. You get it? They're not taking care of the aspect of the future, which is the children. Follow where I'm going? So this is the point we want to emphasize. So this was translated by one of the most famous Egyptologists, Sir Alan Gardiner. And let's see what they come up out of with this translation. Because remember, when they say, brothers and sisters, oh, all you got to do is look at the walls. All you got to do is look at the walls. It's just like America, as stated in 2006. If they tell you don't read the Daily News in New York about Sean Bell getting shot to death by the cops with 50 bullets, when the guy Oliver, who was a police officer, after he shot, he jumped up on a car after reloading and kept shooting. That's what happened in the regard with Sean Bell. You're not going to sit there and get that by looking at the Washington Monument. You got to look in the paper of the current society that we're talking about. You're not getting that from the Great Walls of Rushmore where the presidents are shown. In 1991, in March of 1991, when the cops, may he rest in peace now, Rodney King, beat up Rodney King, the verdict is not even going to be seen on the Great Walls of America. It's going to be in the LA Times. It's going to be in the New York Times. Look at the paper. Not only at the beautiful things like Times Square looks so pretty. No, let's look at the journal right here in the newspaper that says when you get off at Times Square, you're going to see more pollution just coming straight out of New Jersey. There's more pollution in New York than New Jersey. That's one thing. Secondly, when you go to Hollywood, they're not going to tell you this outside of the regular standard neighborhood newspaper. Be careful when you get off that bus or plane because you will get robbed. They're not going to tell you that. They're going to show you the mountains and the Hollywood sign. Yeah, it's pretty. They're giving you a false society. Everything against the Pharaoh. No, it wasn't. Next slide. Thank you. Ipira Papyrus. Papyrus 9, 2 verse 3, 2 through 3. Behold, cattle are left to stray, and there is none to gather them together. Each man fetches for himself those that are branded with his name. Exodus chapter 9, verse 19. Gather thy cattle and all that thou hast in the field. And he that regarded not the word of the Lord left his servants and his cattle in the field. Papyrus, part 9, verse 11. The land is without light. Exodus chapter 10, verse 22. And there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt. Papyrus, part 5, verse 6. Behold, indeed, the children of the princes are dashed against the walls. Papyrus, part 6, verse 12. Behold, for sooth means behold or indeed. The children of the princes are cast out in the streets. Exodus chapter 12, verse 29. And it came to pass at midnight that Yah smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on his throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon. Papyrus chapter 2, part 13. He that places his brother in the ground is everywhere. Exodus chapter 12, verse 30. There was not a house where there was not one dead. Papyrus, part 3, verse 14. It is groaning throughout the land, mingled with lamentations. Exodus chapter 12, verse 13. There was a great cry in the land of Egypt. Papyrus, part 7 and 1. Behold, the fire have mounted up on high. Its building goes forth against the enemies of the land. Exodus chapter 12, verse 21. And by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them by the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. That was the Most High. Ipira Matter, part 4, part 2, verse 5 and 6. Plague is throughout the land, blood is everywhere. Exodus chapter 7, verse 20. All the waters of the river were turned to blood. Papyrus, part 2 and 10. The river is blood. Exodus chapter 7, verse 21. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt, and the river stank. Papyrus, part 2, verse 10. Men shrink from tasting human beings and thirst after water. Papyrus, part 3, verse 10 to 13. This is our water. This is our happiness. What shall we do in respect thereof? All is ruined. Exodus chapter 7, verse 24. And all the Egyptians dug around the river for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the river. Papyrus part 2, verse 10. Behold, gates, columns, and walls are consumed by fire. Exodus chapter 9, verse 23 to verse 24. And a fire ran along the ground. There was hail, and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous. Exodus chapter 5, Papyrus part 5, verse 12. Behold, that has perished, was once yesterday seen. The land is left over to its weariness, like the cutting of flax. Exodus chapter 9, verse 25. And the hail smote every herb of the field and broke every tree of the field. Papyrus part 6, verse 3. Behold, indeed, grain has perished on every side. Exodus chapter 9, verse 31 to verse 32. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in season and the flax was ripe, but the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. Papyrus part 10, verse 3 to verse 6. Lower Egypt weeps. Now, Lower Egypt is northern Egypt, all right? Lower Egypt weeps. The entire place is without revenues. To it belong the ripe wheat and barley, geese and fish. Exodus chapter 10, verse 15. There remained no green thing in the trees or in the herbs of the fields throughout all the land of Egypt. Papyrus part 5, verse 5. Or animals, their hearts weep, cattle moan. Exodus chapter 9, verse 3. The hand of Yah was upon thy cattle which is in the field, and there shall be a grievous sickness. Papyrus part 9, verse 2 to 3. Behold, cattle are left to stray, and there is none to gather them together. Each man fetcheth for himself that which has been branded with his name. Exodus chapter 9, verse 19. Gather thy cattle and that which is in the field. And he that did not fear the word of Yah left his servants in the cattle in the field. Papyrus part 9, verse 11. The land is without light, as stated. Exodus chapter 10, verse 22. And there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt. Now let's jump to the end of this in papyrus on the left-hand side. Gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze are fastened on the neck of female slaves. Exodus chapter 12, part 53, part 53, to verse 36. And they requested from the Egyptians silver and gold, articles and clothing. And Elohim made the Egyptians favor them, and they granted them their request. The Israelites thus drained Egypt of its wealth. Says what? Back in the Emperor Papyrus. Gold and lapis lazuli, silver and malachite, carnelian and bronze were fastened on the neck of female slaves. So this right here is a cross-reference back and forth between the Emperor Papyrus and what we see in the Torah. But remember, the Emperor Papyrus is not on the walls. So some may want to say, oh, it ain't on the walls. You can blind yourself to the evidence if you want to. Let's go on to the next slide. The matter of Passover, Exodus chapter 12. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at even, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at even. 7 days there shall be no leaven found in your houses, for whosoever eateth that which is leavened, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. You shall eat nothing leavened, in all your habitations you shall eat unleavened bread. So this right here is the ordinance, brothers and sisters, in regards to the Passover, so we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about for edification purposes. All right, this is coming as stated from Exodus chapter 12. The Passover papyrus matter. Now, this is dated. Remember, I stated earlier to remember that slide in regards to the Persians ruling in Dynasty 27, because this is the part that we get into in this particular regard. And it says this. All right. Somebody put a message and then retracted, but bless that person too, because I was reading along with the Hebrew. It says, blessed be me, For whatever reason, he or she retracted the message. But blessed be you too, my brother or sister, because I don't know your gender. All right, so it says this: the Passover papyrus matter. To my brethren, Danaya and his colleagues. Okay, somebody wrote this inside of the chat. Says, let me see if I get my Hebrew right here. Baruch hu yodhe wahe kihu bechazik et hayhudim we et hanefesh shel hamish ratim shalom shalom ub rakot laka more yeshaya. Okay, well, to the person who put that inside the chat, bless you too, my brother or sister, for you saying, blessed be me, Baruch More Yeshaya, bless you too. All right, so we're going to go on in this particular part, and it says this: to my brother in Yadoniah and his colleagues, the Jewish garrison, your brother Hananiah, authorize a festival of unleavened bread for the Jewish, which we understand is Israel, garrison. So do count 14 days from the month of Nisan and observe the Passover. As stated yesterday in Shabbat teachings, why this becomes important in biblical archaeology is because it's talking about keeping a biblical holy day that predates the coming of the Septuagint. So that means they already knew about their culture prior to the timing of the Greeks saying we should canonize the Hebrew books. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. It says this: remember, the Septuagint is dated to the 3rd century BCE. The Passover papyrus, as shown, dates to the 5th century BCE. All right, so the Passover papyrus predates the Septuagint. The deaths of the firstborn matter. And it came to pass that at midnight, Yah smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sat on the throne unto the firstborn of the captive that was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of cattle. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house when there was not one dead. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. The person typed in Chief Zebulun ben Levi Hedekiah. I want to take a minute, if I can, and give much due respect to my brother, Chief Zebulun ben Levi. Many people may not know, and he doesn't talk about it much. But that's the brother who made all the covers for the books that I wrote. The brother Zebulun ben Levi that you may see in the chat there. That's the brother who encouraged me to write the first book, Egypt Talking Writing. He's the one who compiled it. And when I say compiled, so I say compressed. Because when I first typed it, it was on 8.5 by 11. That was the brother who compressed it to make it fit into a 5 by 8 and help me with the publishing process. All right? So I give much due respect to my brother, Chief Zebulun ben Levi. It says, let others praise you and not you yourself. So he may not type in the work that he's done, but he's done some work. You may want to check out some of his books, like Israelite Chronology on Amazon. A very good book. All right? Yes, to Yah goes the glory. Blessed be the Most High. The number and the mixed multitude. And the children of Israel journeyed from Raamses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot that were men beside children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, and flocks and herds, even much cattle. All right, so now, one of the arguments given, oh, the Hebrews, they were shepherds. That's usually said from people who don't understand commerce. A shepherd back then, the more flocks and animals you had, the more revenue and paper you had. Or back in those days, what we call paper, they call coins, coinage. You had a certain amount of animals, you had a certain amount of silver. Had a certain amount of silver, you had a certain amount of gold. You understand? That's business. So the people who want to snap on somebody's livelihood, oh, those were just shepherds and people who dealt with goats. Ha ha, LOL. But you have to remember, when you have no income, when you have no revenue coming in, it's easy to try to make jokes about somebody else's. See, that's the problem. You understand? A big problem. All right? So, We're going to go on, brothers and sisters, into the next aspect. Next slide. Thank you. The timing and the season. This day came ye out in the month Abib. Now the word Abib, as the brother Prince Nat and Shema pointed out one Shabbat, comes from its root word Eebree, which means to spring forth, which comes from the root word Ab. We know Ab means what? Father. So spring forth, a man spring forth when he gets forth seed. All right. So this is something we want to talk about because Abib, as you know, means spring. All right. See, that's how Hebrew works. And it shall be when Yah shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, which he swore unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and in the seventh day shall be a feast to the Most High. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall be no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters. So you got to put the leavening out so that way the people can sit there and have some kind of work to be done. Health-wise, when you eat unleavened bread, brothers and sisters, that is to say also you're eating nothing with leavening agents and so forth and so on, such as baking soda, baking powder, rubbing alcohol, things that ferment. The Hebrew word for leavening is chametz. All right? Chametz. And the Hebrew word for vinegar is chometz. All you did was just change a vowel here or there. It had the same ket, mem, zade, sophie. Vinegar, which is fermented, is a part of the leavening agent process. That's why we don't deal with that at that time. Okay? So, we want to go on, brothers and sisters, in this particular regard. Next slide. Thank you. The reason and the memorial. And it came to pass when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that Yah slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to Yah all that openeth the matrix, being males, but all the firstborn of my children I redeem. And it shall be for a token upon thine hand, and for fullness between thine eyes. For by strength of hand Yah brought us forth out of Egypt. This is coming from the book of Deuteronomy, Exodus chapter 13. The memorial of the Pesach is what? It shall be for fullness between thine eyes, and a token upon thine hand, or a sign upon thine hand. You do things with your hands, and something between your eyes will have you looking at it. It's going to make you want to see, what's that between the eyes? What's that right there? That's supposed to be the laws of the Most High. That's supposed to be making your eyes go like, let me keep on trying to look. Oh, that's what that is. Those are the commandments. You get the drift? All right. So let's go back and continue in this regard. The route of the Exodus. All right. And it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that the Most High led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For Elohim said, least peradventure the people repent when they see war and they return to Egypt. Remember, these are people who just being freed from being slaves. So they go and see war. I'm going to go right back. Similar thing with Harriet Tubman aspect. I'm going to go back south. I don't know what I'm going to be looking at if something really bad happens. No, let's go the safer way for the people's heart won't be too scared. Okay? So, but Elohim led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up hardness out of the land of Egypt. And harness, in other words, that they went up armed. They went things in what you call today's terminology called what? What do we call that, brothers and sisters? Reparations. Something for it. See, the Exodus had death and reparations for the servants. Death to the slave master, reparations for the servant. Do you see why they call it the Old Testament? That doesn't fit well with American society. Oh, death to the slave master and reparations for the slaves. I ain't giving them niggas nothing. See, that's the mentality. The Most High will break the people for it to happen. That's what you read of in the book of Isaiah, chapter 60, when it said the king shall come and bring their wealth to you, O Zion. So we will get reparations again when you go in Isaiah chapter 60. Okay, so getting back into this, it says what? And Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Sukkot and encamped in Pithom in the edge of the wilderness. And Yah went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So the only thing, brothers and sisters, that the Israelites knew about the cloud and the fire is Yah. That's all that need to be said. Don't try to find somebody else in that cloud. Next slide. The route of the Exodus in the Amorite land. Now, this was shown before, actually that being last week in a particular map, but I just want to show this again because we're speaking about the Exodus route in the Amorite land, because we read here that it speaks about the people getting into the land of the Amorites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. All right, so when we look at a map, when it shows where the land was at, we want to show for edification purposes. When you're looking, brothers and sisters, at the left-hand side, right, or the left-hand part of this PowerPoint, when you see where it says the wilderness of the Red Sea, right, it says what? And it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, Elohim did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For Elohim said, these peradventure the people repent when they see war and they return to Egypt. But Elohim led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. So, brothers and sisters, the book of Exodus is letting us know, all right, that when the Israelites left up out of the land of Egypt, they went by the wilderness of the Red Sea, not by the way of the Philistines. So when you go back into this slide and you look where it says the way of the Philistines, that was the way they didn't go. But when you look on the same part beneath it or south of it, when it says geographically way of Arabia, then it said the wilderness of the Red Sea, that was the way in which they went. That's why we say, brothers and sisters, Mount Sinai is not in the Sinai Peninsula, but more so in modern-day Saudi Arabia. All right? So that's we are teaching, going more in depth with that. We want to take this chapter by verse, and go into highlights to show the aspect of this in regards. My history teacher was Chief Simeon, for those who know what it is. That brother knows some history. I sat under a teacher. They just come pop up out of magic. You understand what I mean? I had my teachers. Isaiah says, your eyes will see your teachers. Blessed be the Most High. My eyes have seen my teachers, and my eyes are still seeing my teachers. So though I teach the Hebrew here in Shema Yisrael, and I go over these portions here in Shema Yisrael, I'm not one to try to sit there and say that Shema Yisrael is the only one doing this, that, or the third, because my teachers are still teaching. You understand? Now David said, your law, oh Yah, makes me wiser than my teachers. Not archaeology. It's the commandments and the application of it that makes one better than their ancestors. Just like we want our children to be better than us. I would like to think so, because the Most High said concerning the future of Israel that if you live to be 100, you cursed. That's in the book of Isaiah about the future of the house of Israel. It says the person that will live to be 100 will be called a baby and be cursed. You understand? Whereas in today's time, if you live in to be past 70, they're like, you're doing it. You're doing it. Let's see if you can make it to 80. You see? So these are things we just want to talk about for edification purposes. All right? Now, the Exodus route in the Amorite land, right? The part of the route the Exodus took in, it was in the way of Arabia, sorry. The real Mount Sinai was in the land of modern Saudi Arabia. It was not in southern Sinai Peninsula. All right? It was not in southern Sinai Peninsula. All right. So let's understand that. Let's go on to the next slide. The incorrect route, but most accepted. Most people look at the route looking at this here because according to this geographic map that we're looking at, this is where they said Mount Sinai was supposed to be. But what is actually there, brothers and sisters, is a Catholic church. All right. So when they say looking at this here, the incorrect route, but most accepted, the Exodus, Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, what you're looking at there with the green arrows is incorrect. That's why I wanted to put this up because a lot of Israelites have been saying, okay, this must be it. This is not it. The correct route of the Exodus, brothers and sisters, is what we're looking at right here on this slide with the red line going through. All right. Because it said that they dwelt in the wilderness of Zin for X amount of times, where they sat there and wandered around when the Most High was slaying all the wicked off. All right, all the people who just couldn't get the Egypt up out of them, who could not get the Kemet up out of them, who had to I just got to have a little, spirituality with Hapsetset. I got to have a little spirituality with Sekhmet and Hathor. There's nothing wrong with Happy. There's nothing wrong with men. Men with his penis out was made for the sisters. This is what people will tell you. So we have to ask a question. When you look at the Egyptian deities that are nude, like the Egyptian god Men with his penis shown erect, who made that? There is an Egyptian, I'm not putting that picture up. There is an Egyptian god shown with an erect phallus. Who put that picture up? Who made and etched that in stone? Was it women all coming together saying we want to sit there and make an image of the man who they wanted to see? Or did men sit there and make that image, or have an architect say, draw this image of the phallus looking like such and such? Oh, well, the Western mind doesn't understand. Brothers, sisters, nothing new under the sun. The same freaks in the ancient world was the same freaks in the medieval world, is the same freaks in the modern world. You understand? So this is something we want to get into for edification purposes. All right? So, looking upon this particular aspect, brothers and sisters, who made the picture of Men, M-I-N, the Egyptian god, with his penis out, and why is Hapsetset, who's married, running toward it? I'm not showing that. No. So this is something, as stated, we want to point out for edification purposes, because if a man is making that, that's a problem. So then the argument given then is, well, when you have understanding, it was made for the woman. So then we still got to ask a question. You understand? This has to be asked, brothers and sisters, inside of a question format. I have a question concerning this kind of subject in this particular regard. What man is going to make a picture of another man's phallus for his wife, for his lady? You understand? Because when we present the argument that that is perversion, to say that an erect phallus is a sign of fertility, because in order for something to show fertility, something has to be fertilized. Fertilization happens inside of the female. I state again, fertilization happens inside of the female. So showing an erect phallus, there certainly is no female present in those pictures until the 18th dynasty, when they took the Canaanite god Kadesh and have a picture on a lion. You understand? In the new kingdom of Egypt. But the older ones from Dynasty 5 and the older ones from the middle kingdom of Egypt, where all the men would sit there and gather around with the priesthood of men, and they all used to sit there and have an all-male party together. You know what they're talking about in that particular regard? That's documented inside of Egyptian records. That's why Egyptian law and what they call the principles of Ma'at, I have not done this. I have not done that. None of that can sit there and actually state they have not done X, Y, and Z, aka homosexuality, because that was not against that culture. You understand? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes, right? Real Mount Sinai is in the land of modern Saudi Arabia. So let's go on to the next part. As we show near that particular regard, with the map that's being shown there, that's not really the Exodus route as we were talking about before. All right, Sarah Bet El Hadim inscription, Avaris map. All right, we went over this yesterday in teaching, but want to go over it again. But as for those who were following yesterday, those who are following now, you can see that there's more information being presented now concerning the same subject, and there will be more in the same particular teaching concerning the same subject. All right, so let's go on to the next slide. And it says this, the translation in part. The wind blowing, the sea dividing into parts. They pass over the Hebrews flee through the sea. The sea is turned into dry land. The waters permitted and dismissed to flow, burst rushing unawares upon the astonished men, congregated from quarters banded together, to slay treacherously, being lifted up with pride. Their leader divideth asunder the sea, its waves roaring. The people enter and pass through the midst of the waters. Moses causes the people to haste like a fleet-winged sea ostrich crying aloud. The cloud shining bright, a mighty army propelled into the Red Sea is gathering into one. They go jumping and skipping, journeying through the open channel, taking flight from the face of the enemy. The surge of the sea is divided. The people flee. The tribe descend into the deep. The people enter the waters. The people enter and penetrate through the midst. The people are filled with stupor and perturbation. Yahweh is the keeper of the companion. Their enemies weep for the dead. The verges are wailing. The sea flowing down overwhelmed them. The waters were let loose to flow again. The people depart fugitive. A mighty army is submerged in the deep sea, the only way of escape for the congregated people. So, brothers and sisters, in this particular regard, it says what? When we're getting into this particular teaching right here, a mighty army is submerged in the deep sea, the only way of escape for the congregated people. Why do I emphasize in rereading that last line? Because as stated before, scholars and archaeologists want to sit there and ask the Israelites, well, if Joseph was taken there by foot, and if Jacob went there by foot, and if you go by the book of Joshua, you had it where Naphtali left by foot, Naphtali himself, not the tribe. All right. Then why didn't they just walk out of Egypt if they just walked into Egypt? This is why, not to be disrespectful or anything of that sort, brothers and sisters, a lot of people who promote the whole Kemet thing and the Kemet teaching and the anti-Tanakh and the anti-Hebrew stuff, they don't really study Egyptian history either. And I'm not saying that's applicable to everyone, but it generally seemed to be the loudmouth ones, if I may use that term, because if you know anything about Egyptian history in Dynasty 12, not saying that anybody knows everything, because we're all still learning. But in a book that you see, as stated earlier, Introduction to Ancient Egypt by T. James, Amenemhat the First built a chain of fortresses, which they refer to in archaeology as the walls of the ruler or the walls of the prince. You can look that up yourself. It is referred to, built by the beginning of Dynasty 12, to keep out the Ammu or the Asiatics, a fort of walls, referred to as the walls of the ruler or the walls of the prince. The fact that that was built is why you can see the Israelites having to leave in Dynasty 13 through the only way of escape was through the water. This is something we want to point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. All right? You can't sit there and try to sit there and deny that when we're naming the peoples that we're talking about. Look up at Amenemhat the First in the walls of the ruler and why they refer to a thing called the prophecy of Nefertiti. And the prophecy of Nefertiti in Egypt is stated to there will be a particular pharaoh that will get rid of the Ammu or the Asiatics. See, because the ancient Egyptians and mentality is not that far once it comes down to strangers than like the Americans. Because see, Donald Trump wanted to build a wall in regards to Mexico, but his clothes are made in Mexico by people who are called Mexican. The Israelites were part of the Asiatics that was going to be sit there and be thrust out, but you want to keep them in there because they're a good economic aspect. So you love them for one thing, but you hate them in spirit. So you can never fake your spirit. So when Donald Trump sat there and stated after he wanted to build his wall, and we all know what we're talking about in that particular regard, is not that far-fetched. Like Amenhotep the First, who built what is referred to as the walls of the ruler inside of ancient Egypt. That's why that happened in Dynasty 12 with Amenhotep the First. All right? You can look at this here. The only way of escape for the congregated people. See, they didn't expect Israelites in a Kemet Hebrew debating for Israelites to study. Because one of the arguments that was made was Israelites only read the Bible. Well, that seemed to be the one book that you didn't read, brother, sister, debater. Because another thing is, in order for them to have any kind of clout, they got to sit there and keep on talking against the house of Israel. So as pointed out in the book that I wrote, Egypt Talking Writing, what they have done is take the European Jew, the white Jew, if you will, as a catalyst, as a way of he representing the Hebrew. And then saying, see, he only dates to the era of the Khazars. There is a teacher that went around saying that. But if the Khazars has any form of what they would call Judaism, that means it had to exist before the Khazar conversion. They didn't convert to what they created. Silly. So this is things for those who know the debate circuit can gain an understanding of what is being spoken and talked about. You understand? Next slide. Thank you. What we just read is a part of the translation from the Serabit El Akadim. This is an external reference found in the Sinaitic writings concerning the Exodus. And it names Yah, and it names Moshe, and it talks about the Hebrews. All right, so let's go on. Jacob Hardescarab in the matter of F. Petrie. F stood for Flinders. He was one of the archaeologists that dates back into the 1900s. All right, so actually 1800s. Pardon me. All right, claims made by the archaeologist Flinders Petrie. Egypt's Middle Kingdom, MK stands for Middle Kingdom. Egypt's Middle Kingdom had slaves. The slaves escaped in haste. The slaves lived in Kahun. Boxes of babies found, just skeletons dating to the era of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. So I guess they did find some of the well, yeah, did you find the bodies right there according to that archaeologist there? Now, what I sat there and showed, brothers and sisters, on the left-hand side is the Jacob Hall of Skyrab. All right? Because brothers and sisters, there was a pharaoh that was ruling in Dynasty 16 by the name of Yaakov Baal or Yaakov Har. Har in the Egyptian, not Har in the Hebrew, is what the other peoples, such as some of the Asiatic, refer to as Baal. Because you have to understand that in transliteration, which we went over in Hebrew class 13, which is on this particular channel, you would have it to where it's seen that the L in Asiatic languages is transliterated to the Egyptian R. Just like in Spanish, you have the English word Janet. For instance, in Spanish, it's not said as Janet, but Janet. Correct me if I'm wrong, if my Spanish is off. So this is just to be pointed out for edification purposes. All right? So that's what we're looking at there in that particular regard on the left-hand side. I'm not saying that this is Jacob, the father of Joseph, like some people may try to insinuate. No, I'm just showing that there was Asiatics and people of other languages inside of Egypt before, during, and after the Hyksos era, which next week, Father willing, we'll get much more in detail concerning that kind of matter. All right. I think somebody typed in, I'm right. I guess that's the Janet and Janet matter. If that be the case, thanks. Okay, so we're going to go on into this particular aspect, right? The Torah does not come from Ma'at. The climate and culture of the Egyptians and the Israelites are different because the Egyptian culture And climate, I want to talk on. It has it to where the Nile overflowed. You read about that in the book of Zechariah, even. All right. The overflow of the Nile is part of the climate of the Egyptians. The main river for the Israelites was the Jordan River. The Jordan River doesn't overflow for irrigation for the Israelites. All right. The climate and culture of the Egyptians and the Israelites are different. The sacred times of the Israelites and Egyptians are different. This is why you can't trace Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret, Shabbat, Pesach, Yom Teruah, and certainly Yom Kippur. You cannot trace those holy days back to Egyptian culture. All right? The Egyptian calendar is different than the Hebrew calendar because the Egyptian calendar has a 10-day week. The Israelites have a 7-day week. All right? So the week, the number of days in a week is different. So the culture itself is different. All right. And the Egyptians wasn't even saying that that they taught the Hebrews anything. All right. The Egyptians were not going around sitting up there saying that they were not slave masters. All right. The sacred times of the Israelites and the Egyptians are different. Now, when they wrote the Septuagint under the orders of Ptolemy Philadelphus, and you read about the Exodus in there, where is the Egyptians that were saying, Ptolemy, that story's not real? Them Hebrews are making that up. Show the reference where the Egyptians, because they're saying we got all the Egyptian writings and the only thing the Israelites got the copies. So if you got all of those Egyptian writings, then show where the Egyptians, when they were certainly knowledge of the Israelite story, version of the Exodus, certainly during the time of the hegemony of the Greek ruler Ptolemy Philadelphus in regards to the Septuagint, show where the Egyptians were then saying that is not true, Ptolemy. Don't let them write that, and don't think nations wouldn't do it, because when the book of Ezra talks about Israelites building the temple, the other nations were saying, Darius, don't let them Israelites build that. So these are things we just want to talk about. The other nations will make a plea against other people to sit there and have the Israelites cast out. That's why, and I say this not to be harsh or disrespectful, but collaborating with the brother Prince Nathaniel said, all them so-called Philosophians are not Israel. Why? Because the Israelites, and here's what we're talking about. The Israelites that you see in Dimona that came out of geographically Chicago, came out of Detroit, when they were taken over and went over in their own accord to the land of Israel, many of the Philosophians are Israel. Many of the Philosophians are not Israel. So when you see about the different nations going against Israel, the true house of Israel, Cush is listed as one of them in the future. So these are things we want to talk about. Not all those people airlifted in Operation Moses and in Operation Solomon were of the true house of Israel. The so-called Philosophians who call themselves Beta Israel are not all Bnei Israel. Many are, not all are. So this is something we want to talk about for reason and purposes. The people known as them, they made a plea to the European Jews and the Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewish communities in Israel to get the Israelites that came out of Dimona and into Dimona out. I want to repeat what I stated. You have people who are called and are called Philosophians that made a plea against the Israelites in Dimona and asking them to have no more of those girls come over there. That's what happened, brothers and sisters, in the 1980s. You understand? So these are things just want to be talked about for edification purposes. Because Israel, the true house of Israel, is not going to see the true house of Israel and say, oh no, get them out. Israel is going to say, bring more. You understand? So you can kind of tell what that's talking about in that particular regard. All right. So this is something to be pointed out for edification purposes. See, the book of Isaiah speaks about Israelites in the land of Cush, aka Ethiopia. You understand? And the book of Ezekiel talks about people saying that they are Israel, but are really Cushites that will be against the true house of Israel. That's why you have to understand line upon line and precept upon precept. All right? So this is something to be noted. Now, the understanding of saying the Hebrew culture is from Egypt is from two Europeans, Sigmund Freud and Gerald Massey. The Egyptian culture does not have a set diet, does not have a set rules for the king, does not have a ban against homosexuality, as pointed out, this is why you're seeing Pepi II of Dynasty 6 of Egypt dealing in regards to homosexuality when he had a wife and then his servants wrote about it in a papyrus. You're not going to see that again on the walls. Look to the papyrus of Dynasty 6 with Pepi II and the homosexuality affair. The Egyptian priests would eat the body of the pharaoh in the ritual. Because see, inside of Egyptian culture, they had a thing in which the pharaoh was the incarnate of the god of Egypt. You understand? Some people say it was this god or that god. That's their own business. But you will find out that there was a pharaoh named Taharka of Dynasty 25 that stated, "Don't eat me when I pass away." Why do you think when they show pharaohs' bodies today, they show what? From the shoulders up. King Tut is the only pharaoh archaeologists have found that the body is complete. Where are the other body parts? We're not going to get too graphic. We know what it is because remember, they had no problem in their own priesthood with their own particular ways regarding today's terminology of homosexuality. Remember, as stated, King Tut or Tutankhamun, the one who passed away before the age of 20, is the only pharaoh whose tomb was found where his whole body is all intact. Where are the other body parts? This is something remembering, like what Taharka of Dynasty 25 asked, "Don't eat me when I die." They had no problem because with that, you're eating the god in that particular culture. There's a reason why Yah said, "Don't do as the ways of the Egyptians." And if you don't think when we read the Most High will send you back into Egypt in ships, today it's already been exposed that yes, they will sit there and take human meat and pass it off and sell it as regular meat. Vegetarians been pointing this out for a minute. So we want this to be noted for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. There's something wrong. Next slide. Thank you. The Egyptians were more tolerant of the Europeans than the Israelites was. That's why I remember asking one time, was there any Egyptian history in which they fought against the Europeans? Because even Europeans speak about the Israelites fighting against the Europeans, like how you got Hanukkah in the first place, when the Maccabees went up against Antiochus IV. So when do you find the Egyptians fighting against the Egyptians? I mean, against the Europeans. Maybe you can show me that. I don't know everything. Still learning. All right, Deuteronomy chapter 29. All right, we're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 15 through verse 17. All right, so we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 15. Thank you, my brother.
Hallelujah. For ye know how we dwelt in the land of Egypt, and how we came to the midst of the nations through which ye passed. And ye have seen their detestable things in their idols, wood and stone, silver and gold, which were in them. Lest there should be among you man or woman or family or tribe whose heart turneth away this day from Yah our power.
All right, so thank you, my brother. So essentially, it says you have seen their detestable things and their idols. I don't know where their body parts are because they had no problem eating some of them, but we're going to move on. So this is something we get into that when it says their idols and their detestable things. Brothers and sisters, what are some of their idols? Making images of the sun and the moon and bowing down to them. I'm going to ask the brother, Josiah, my assistant in this regard, to go into the book of Ezekiel chapter 20, and we're going to go to Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 6. All right? So we can gain some understanding of what we're talking about. We in the book of Ezekiel, the 20th chapter and the 6th verse. And it says this. Thank you, my brother.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. And I said unto them, cast ye away every man the detestable things of his eyes. Slika, that's 7.
No, read on, brother.
That's 7.
Read on, brother.
Cain, the things of their eyes, and defile not yourself with the idols of Egypt. I am Jehovah your God.
Read on.
But they rebelled against me, and would not hearken unto me. They did not every man cast away the detestable things of their eyes, neither did they forsake the idols of Egypt.
All right, so it says in the book of Ezekiel that the Most High was telling the people, cast away the abomination of your eyes and defile not yourselves with the idols of Egypt. You know, one of the things when they sit there and present, they make their gods of silver and gold look all pretty and all nice. After the seeing of your eyes, do not defile yourselves with the idols of the god of Egypt. So when you're sitting up there, and how does that become defiled? Is, for instance, the situation with the men and the erect phallus aspect, the aspect of Hathor showing in their theology, Ra, her father, her vagina, and supposedly Ra became happy. Need not see my daughter's vagina. That's not necessary for any kind of purpose. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right. On the walls of Karnak, a married woman is seen showing after the image of another man's private parts. The Egyptians saw the earth as masculine when we know the earth takes seed. All right. Now, as stated, brothers and sisters, before, in the matter of Dathan and Abiram, the Most High was called upon by the prophet Moshe and said, if the earth opened her mouth, earth is not masculine. Earth is feminine. Jeb or Jebe is a masculine deity inside the Egyptian culture, but that represents earth as a man, but you put your seed in the earth. Where is your mind at? The Egyptians have no prophecy of a God coming to deliver them from their troubles. Like the Hebrews do, it said the Hebrews had prophets and knew what will befall them if they did not keep the commandments. So in concluding in that in part, where is your prophecies at? Because one of the things that's stated is what? Well, that's been plagiarized and it was taken from Egyptian culture. So what god of Egypt stated that they're going to come and save the Ammu? What god of the Egyptians said they're going to go and save the Asiatic, Western Asiatic, the children of the Shemite, the children of the Hapiru? Then I don't know what papyrus that is because I doubt that's on the walls. So we're going to go on to the next slide. Now, why are we saying in this particular regard right here, there's Egypt and there's Africa? Because in the pseudo concept, brothers and sisters, you have it to where, looking at the left-hand side, Egypt, it represents, the black man. The black man, we pharaoh, we kings. The people that Pepe had glossed over with honey so the flies won't be around the pharaoh, but the flies stay among the servants. Those servants were black. The ancient Egyptians were not pro-black. They were pro-Kemet, Deshret, Mawati. They were pro-Waset, now today called Thebes. They were pro-Menofer, now today called Memphis. They were pro-Ainu, which the Greeks later on called Heliopolis. They were not pro-Africa. They were not pro-power to the people, fist in the air with the Afro pick. No, they cut their hair and put wigs on. That's what they did. This is something to be noted for edification purposes. Then when you, oh my gosh, you're just hating on Egypt, if you say so. Looking at the right side of this, it says what? There's Africa. See, this is a map dating back to the 1800s. So that's a continent. That's a landmass. See, all of that is not represented in small Egypt. Egypt is not small, but it's small compared to a continent. See, we're not saying every black person is the house of Israel. The Torah says that Israel was the least of all nations as far as numbers was concerned. You understand? The Canaanites exceeded in numbers the house of Israel. The Edomites were recessive in numbers in regards to the house of Israel. But what we want to point out, brothers and sisters, What we want to point out, brothers and sisters, is this. There's Egypt and there's Africa. In pseudoscience, you got to where Egypt is supposed to represent the aspect of black people. So you forget all the other parts of that same landmass. It's deep because the Israelites didn't forget it. In their writings, you read about Fut, which is Libya. Some people say Eritrea and Somalia. You read about Cush, which we understand to be Ethiopia. You understand? You read about Havilah and Sheba and Dedan, the sons of Ham, that extended, according to Bible dictionaries, going toward Western Africa. You read about how the people of Fut in history, biblical term called Put, brothers and sisters, became the Futa Jalon that you see later on going into Western Africa itself. You read about the people in later history referred to also, that comes down to the aspect, brothers and sisters, of the Zulu. So it extended beyond that. See, when you read about the red and white crown in ancient Egypt, and that represented the unity of Upper and Lower Egypt, the map that you're seeing on the right-hand side, it didn't represent unity for that. It represented unity, brothers and sisters, for the landmass that you see in there, Upper and Lower Egypt. It did not even include Nubia. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. The class in part. This is the class that we do in Shema Yisrael on Shabbat in part. This right here is history to be noted. All right? History to be noted. What I'm going to do right now is remain silent and have the people just sit and read this particular subject. And with that, I say Torah for the time. Shalom. What we'll do, brothers and sisters, for those who are online and able to see it currently, you can read it. When it's posted onto YouTube, you can pause it at that particular aspect and read it then. Get your pens, get your pads, and take notes. Shema Yisrael is a school of understanding, giving thanks and honor to the Most High. Sometimes in a school setting, I'm thankful for the position that's been given as a more. Just give the people notes and then move on from there. Shalom. This is being presented to you from Shema Yisrael. This is for edification purposes. Not reading it, but it will be posted for those who can read it, care to read it, can pause it when it's uploaded, and so forth. Shalom. Shalom. Giving honor and praise unto Yah, creator and maker of heaven and earth. This book is available, gets into the information we discussed, but much more in detail than we didn't do on this. The book that you see right there is much more in detail than the information that we presented. All right. With that, shalom. Have a good evening. Good night. Shalom Lakem.